The spreadsheet in front of me had 3 columns, and I was staring at the middle one like it was written in a language I'd never learned. 19 years running a print shop in London taught me how to read numbers. 47 days in Phuket had taught me that the numbers you see aren't always the ones that matter. I'd opened my laptop that morning in the apartment overlooking Patong Beach, the one I'd promised myself at 32 I'd never afford, and clicked into the email from my accountant. The subject line was blank. That's when I realised something was fundamentally wrong. My name is Martin. I'm 74. I built a functioning business from nothing twice, which means I've learned what actually works, and I've learned it slowly enough that the lessons stick. A print shop doesn't run itself. It runs on repetition. It's the same processes every day, the same quality checks, the same people doing the same reliable thing until it becomes invisible. Because it works so well, you stop noticing it's working at all. That was my mistake. Not in London, in Phuket. I brought that philosophy with me, and it nearly destroyed everything I'd spent 3 years rebuilding. I arrived with £316,000. That was 18 years of savings, a decent property settlement, and 3 years of good decisions in a row. Not a fortune by Western standards, but enough that I didn't have to chase bad money. I could build something real. I could choose the clients, not let them choose me. That was the luxury I'd earned. That was the one thing I wasn't going to compromise on this time. I'd already been the desperate version of myself. I wasn't interested in being him again. If the business started in a coffee shop, digital marketing retainers for UK hospitality businesses, hotels, guest houses, pub chains trying to figure out Instagram. I knew that world. I'd been their customer once. I knew what they wanted and how little they understood about what they actually needed. The first client took 6 weeks to find. The second took 4 weeks because I could point to results from the first. By month 4, I had 3 clients paying £1,200 a month each. Not extraordinary, entirely sustainable, exactly what I'd calculated when I sat down and thought about what success looked like if I had no safety net and no plan B. The growth happened the way real growth happens, not in spikes, in steady accumulation. By month 12, I had 7 retainers and one-off projects that came through referral. By month 24, and I had turned down more work than I was accepting because I'd learned that saying no to the wrong client is more valuable than the income. The money stopped being theoretical. By month 36, the monthly income was approaching £18,000 before expenses. The business was real. The systems worked. I had stopped needing to prove it to myself. That's when I realised I'd made the mistake I'd promised myself I wouldn't make. I was working 60-hour weeks managing logistics that a competent person could handle in 30. I was the ceiling of the operation. The business couldn't grow because I was doing the thing that should have been automated 6 months earlier. I needed operational support. I needed someone reliable inside the time zone who could handle client communication, quote turnarounds, and the 100 small decisions that were eating up my actual work time. I needed someone I could trust to execute the system I'd built without compromising it. I met her at a networking event in one of the hotel conference rooms. Melissa, that's what she called herself, though I learned later that wasn't the name on her ID. She was a front desk supervisor at the Hilton, which meant she'd spent 8 years dealing with difficult foreigners in a second language while managing the kind of operational pressure that either breaks you or teaches you how systems work. Her English was precise. She didn't speak faster than she thought. She asked clarifying questions before committing to anything. In a hire, those are not small things. The trial period was 3 weeks. She worked half-time while keeping her hotel job. She handled the client communication. She managed the quote turnaround process. She built a simple project tracking system without being asked. The first time a client sent a confused email, she didn't come to me asking what to do. She researched the issue, provided 3 options, and copied me on the response. That's not competence. That's the kind of ownership you can't teach. After the trial, I offered her 72,000 baht a year. That was roughly double her hotel salary. She accepted by email within 2 hours. The moment I moved her to full-time was the moment I made the decision that changed everything. Not consciously, I didn't sit down and think, I will now stop paying attention to my operational costs. But that's what happened. Once the system was working, once the clients were serviced, the emails were answered, the projects were tracked, I stopped auditing it. I told myself it was because I trusted her. I told myself I was finally doing what I'd always planned to do in retirement. Work on the business instead of in it. Neither of these things was entirely false. Both of them were excuses that would cost me everything. She asked, about 3 months into the role, if we could move her salary into the business account as an operational payment, rather than paying it as a personal draw. This made the paperwork cleaner for her, she said. It meant the UK accountant could see the staffing costs directly. It was a reasonable request. It was also the mechanism of everything that followed. I said yes. I arranged the transfer with my bank. I didn't think about it again for 11 months. The first request came while we were sitting in the office. He's looking at Q3 projections. The revenue was up. Client retention was strong. We had taken on 2 new retainers and turned down 3 more. Everything in the dashboard looked like a success story. She asked if we could move some of the equipment costs through my personal account. She needed a laptop for client meetings. The software licenses were expensive. There was a camera for the content shoots. Could she just send the invoices to me and I could reimburse her personally? It would be simpler than the procurement process, and it meant she could get the equipment faster. I said no, not harshly, practically. The whole point of moving her salary into the operational account was to keep everything in the business system. The audit trail was there for a reason. If we started pulling things back into personal reimbursement, we created gaps. I'd run a print shop long enough to know that gaps are how fraud happens, even unintentional fraud. I explained this. I suggested we invoice the equipment through a vendor account and pay it that way. She accepted without argument. The next day, she sent me a list of the items we needed and said she'd handle it. I thought nothing more of it. But something had shifted. I didn't notice because the business was still working. The monthly revenue continued to climb. Client satisfaction scores were up. The operational stress that had been crushing me 6 months earlier had simply vanished. I was working 40 hours a week now instead of 60. I was writing again, something I'd wanted to do since retirement became theoretical instead of actual. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I know now exactly what it meant. It happened in the audit. And my UK accountant, Michael, brilliant man, meticulous with reconciliation, called me in late November. He had a question about the operational account statement. There were transfers, he said, to a separate account, small ones, regular ones. They added up. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Then I called her and asked directly. She said they were temporary loans for operational equipment that she was purchasing on behalf of the company. All the receipts were there. All of it was legitimate business spend. Did I want to see the documentation? I asked to see the documentation. The receipts were real. The equipment was real. The business genuinely needed everything on the list. But the equipment was being purchased from vendors in Bangkok that I didn't recognise, and the invoices were marked as paid to her personal account, with the company reimbursing her monthly. This was the structure she'd set up after I refused the personal reimbursement request. She wasn't asking anymore. She was telling me how the system worked, and she was doing it after the fact, when refusing would cause problems. Each transaction seemed minor. Together, they were systematic. Michael sent me the full spreadsheet in early December. 11 months of transfers. Some of them £800, some of them £2,400, some of them £1,300. None of them round numbers, which was smart. Round numbers trigger audits. All of them documented as legitimate business expenses. All of them signed off by her in her role as operations manager, with signatory access to the account. Together, They amounted to £316,000. Not approximately, exactly. Down to the pound. That was the moment I understood what had happened. And she hadn't stolen my profits. She had given me back my starting point and kept everything I had built on top of it. The 3 years of work, the slow accumulation of clients, the systems I'd written and refined, the reputation I'd built with careful execution, all of that had been methodically extracted and transferred to her personal accounts. The business was still functioning because the client work was still good. My salary was still there because she understood that if I ran out of money, I would start asking questions earlier. The only variable she'd misjudged was the annual audit. She'd assumed I wouldn't do one, or I'd do a cursory one, or I'd be too embarrassed to push the numbers to their logical conclusion. What she didn't know was that I'd been audited by the UK tax authority twice in 19 years. Thus, and I understood exactly how far compliance stretched before it snapped. I asked her to come to the office on a Tuesday morning. I printed the statement myself. I laid out the transfers in chronological order. I said what I had to say. She didn't deny any of it. She asked how much time she had to leave Thailand. That was the question that told me everything I needed to know about whether this was a mistake or a strategy. She said her parents had debts. The family land boundary claim had cost them more than they could sustain. Her job at the Hilton had never paid enough to help. She'd found a way to help. She hadn't meant for it to go this far. The business was strong enough. Surely I could weather the loss. Surely I was insured. Every statement was technically true and completely irrelevant. I'd trusted her with systems, and not with access to my capital. She'd reinterpreted that trust as permission to reshape it. I told her to transfer out of the flat by the end of the week. I called my lawyer, a Thai national who'd worked with foreign business owners long enough to know the landscape, and asked what options I had. The answer was essentially none that wouldn't cost more than the money she'd taken. The accounts it went to were in her parents' names. The equipment purchases had genuine invoices. The business documentation was technically in order. Thailand's legal system would take 3 years minimum. I could spend £50,000 fighting for £316,000 I'd never recover. Or I could accept the loss and keep what I had left. Imagine if you had waited another month, if you'd pulled that audit forward, if you'd installed the second layer of access control you'd been thinking about, if you'd trusted your instinct instead of your system. None of it mattered. What mattered was what came next. She left on a Friday. I kept the business. The client stayed because the client work was still good. I ran the operations myself for 6 months, which was painful and taught me nothing I hadn't already learned. By July, I hired someone else, a woman in Manchester who worked remotely, and I paid through a UK payroll system with proper separation of access. I was more careful with the audit trail. I was more careful with the systems. I was infinitely more careful about the thing I'd stopped doing after the first 6 months of success. I never stopped paying attention to the operational account again. The bitter part is that she was right about one thing. The business was strong enough to weather it. I still had clients. I still had skills. The laptop and the internet connection still worked. Within 14 months, I'd rebuilt the income to what it had been before the extraction. Within 2 years, I'd exceeded it. The skill was portable. The system was transferable. The trust was not. That's the lesson that took much longer to understand. 6 months after leaving Thailand, I spent 2 weeks in the Philippines. Same business model, same setup, different country. 15 months later, I found the same pattern starting. Small requests, legitimate sounding documentation, one person with access slowly becoming 2 people with control. I shut it down immediately. The difference wasn't that I'd become cynical. It was that I'd stopped confusing a system that's working with a system that doesn't need watching. Those are not the same thing. The people who succeed at building sustainable operations in Southeast Asia are either the ones paranoid enough to maintain separation of access, or the ones naive enough to genuinely not care if they lose it all. there's almost no middle ground. I thought I was in the middle. I was actually in neither. I cared deeply. I just stopped paying attention. That's not building. That's optimism dressed up as management. The only thing worth trusting in this place is your own willingness to stay awake while everything around you assumes you're sleeping.